Hi everyone, it's been a 007 back for another episode of our Agatha Christie Reread series. This is episode 64. We only have 3 books left, and this is Postern of Fate, which is the last novel that Agatha Christie wrote in her lifetime. It was published in November 1973 when she's 83 years old. It comes after Elephants Can Remember, published in 72, and comes before Curtain, the final Hercule Poirot story published in 75. But this is the last Tommy and Tuppence novel, the only detective pairing that we have. Well, I suppose apart from Poirot and Ariadne Oliver, and also the only ones that age visibly as the years go on. So, what is the title of this novel? 4 great gates has the city of Damascus: Postern of Fate, the Desert Gate, Disaster's Cavern, Fort of Fear. Pass not beneath, O caravan, or pass not singing. Have you heard that silence where the birds are dead, yet something pipeth like a bird? So that's a quotation from Gates of Damascus by James Elroy Flecker, which is a poem that's quoted often in this book, and that's where the title comes from. As to the setup, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford have just become the proud owners of an old house in an English village. Along with the property, they have inherited some worthless bric-a-brac, including a collection of antique books. While rustling through a copy of The Black Arrow, Tuppence comes upon a series of apparent random underlinings. However, when she writes down the letters, they spell out a very disturbing message. Mary Jordan did not die naturally, and 60 years after their first murder, Mary Jordan's enemies are still ready to kill. So that's the setup, as written on the back of my version of the novel in paperback. So as I said, this is the last novel that Agatha Christie wrote. It's long. It's 320 pages, where Curtain, for example, is 240. It's sad in the way that Elephants Can Remember is sad, because it shows a once great novelist who is no longer in control fully of her narrative. So there's lots of rambling, lots of repetition. Interestingly, there's lots of mention of the Tommy and Tuppence novel N or M, which was set in World War II, but none of the pricking of my thumbs, which is only a couple of books before this one. Lots of timelines are muddled. So, for instance, the age of their child, their daughter Deborah, doesn't really tally with how old she would have been in prior books. Similarly, the age of the grandchildren. There's lots of long discussions about childhood and long memory, what breakfasts would have been like in country houses before the war, and that's the prior war, and also childhood memories and books that one loves to read. So, as with Elephants Can Remember, you feel that this is Agatha in her frail dotage, with her long-term memory far better than her short-term memory, really looking back in a state of nostalgia. And it is a theme of these final sort of 5 to 10 novels, that the vast majority of them are investigating crimes that happened in the past, maybe because that was a preoccupation of Agatha Christie, just thinking back into the long-term past. A few words on Agatha Christie and how she was as she wrote this book. Per her biography and many people talking about it, she was very taxed by writing this book. She found it very hard to concentrate. Max Mallowan, her second husband, said that writing this book nearly killed her. And Rosalind, her daughter, didn't want it published. I can quite see why, because she was very concerned with her mother's health and legacy, and it can hardly be said that this book burnishes her legacy. And after it was published, really said to the publisher, Collins, no more, do not press my mother for another book. So it is the final book that she wrote in her lifetime, and it was still a bestseller. Like, it's not one of the better books, but it was one of the bestsellers. I think by this point, people bought their Christie for Christmas and completed their series. And, she was the best-selling author of her time from 1921 through to 1973 and onwards. But this is a book of the 1970s as much as it is of the past, and there is social change, as there always is with Agatha Christie. We have the mention of the common market here. So Britain has joined the European Economic Community, as it then was, a forerunner to the European Union, mentioned here and also in Passenger to Frankfurt. We also have a mention of the rise of the welfare state. This is now well embedded since the Second World War, and is in sharp contrast to the world of the 1920s when we first met Agatha Christie. It reminds me a little bit of the play Nye, about Honoria and Bevan, who set up the NHS, our National Health Service, that I saw recently at the National Theatre. Here's the quotation. But she got ill and died before that. What did she die of? Did she die down here? I suppose she went to hospital. Oh no, I don't think there were any hospitals to go to then. Wasn't any welfare in those days, end quote. And welfare here is spelt with a capital W. There is a moan and a gripe about parking in London, as in Elephants Can Remember, which speaks to my heart. So Tommy has to leave his car in a West London suburb called Hounslow and then take the tube in, which is what lots of people do going into London. They park kind of on the periphery and then take public transport in. Quote, I found a new possible place to park a car. That's always useful, said Tuppence. Where was that? Near Hounslow. What on earth did you want to go to Hounslow for? Well, I didn't actually go to Hounslow. There's a sort of car park there. Then I took a tube, you know. And then, of course, we have the rise of new literary academic subjects like sociology. And this again is Tommy speaking with Tuppence. Because I too, said Tommy, have been doing research. Oh, everyone's doing research nowadays, said Tuppence. You know, all the teenagers and all one's nephews or cousins or other people's sons and daughters, they're all doing research. I don't know actually what they do research into nowadays, but they never seem to do it, whatever it is, afterwards. They just have the research and a good time doing the research, and they're very pleased with themselves, and, well, I don't know quite what comes next. Betty, our adopted daughter, went to East Africa, said Tommy. Have you heard from her? Yes, she loves it there, loves poking into African families and writing articles about them. Do you think the families appreciate her interest? Asked Tommy. I shouldn't think so, said Tuppence. In my father's parish, I remember, everyone disliked the district visitors, nosy park as they called them. So this is interesting on two counts. Number one, the rise of anthropology and sociology and behavioural and real research, but also the fact that it mentions their adopted daughter, because obviously in many Agatha Christie novels, including Elephants Can Remember, Agatha seems to have a real prejudice against adoption and the idea that you can be a real mother and have a real maternal or paternal link to your children through adoption, which I find quite distasteful. But in this novel, Tommy and Tuppence have an adopted daughter and it all seems to go rather swimmingly. So that's rather a relief. And then, as I mentioned before, if you speak of social change, think back to Mysterious Affair of Styles and sideboards filled with hot dishes for breakfast in a country house. There is nostalgia for that from Tuppence. I expect, said Tuppence, it's what the Parkinsons used to have for breakfast here, fried egg or poached eggs and bacon, and perhaps... She threw her mind a good long way back to remembrances of old novels. Perhaps, yes, perhaps cold grouse on the sideboard. Delicious. Oh, yes, I remember. Delicious it sounded. Of course, I suppose children were so unimportant that they only let them have the legs. Legs of game are very good because you can nibble at them. She paused with the last piece of kidney in her mouth. And of course, to us in 2025, thinking back to eating kidney for breakfast seems very, very unusual. I think the only time one sees things like that is if you go to hotels in seaside towns. Okay, so what are the events surrounding the publication of this novel? What would the reader have in their mind as they received their Christie for Christmas? In December 1972, we have Apollo 17 returning to Earth, concluding the program of lunar exploration, which had become very, very expensive, and the public was uninterested in it at a time of great social strife and economic difficulty. January 1973, the UK, the Republic of Ireland, and Denmark enter the European Economic Community, as I said before. January also is the suspension of offensive action in North Vietnam. Richard Nixon announces that. So kind of the end of the Vietnam War. And we also have Ferdinand Marcos becoming president for life in the Philippines, and Nixon being sworn in for his second term as president. Apparently, he's the only person in US history to be sworn in for 2 terms as president and 2 terms as vice president. In March 1973, a referendum is held in Northern Ireland over whether to reunite with the Republic of Ireland or stay as part of the UK, and the result was 98% remain. I wonder what it would be today. The Provisional Irish Republican Army responds to the referendum by planting 4 car bombs in London on the same day, 2 of which went off, causing 1 death and injuring over 200 people. At the Academy Awards that year, and we're coming up to this year's Academy Awards, The Godfather won Best Picture. And there were 8 wins for Cabaret, the Bob Fosse adaptation of the musical. In April 1973, for the first time ever, VAT, value-added tax, is introduced in the UK. So that's a sales tax. This blew my mind. On April 3rd, 1973, we had the first handheld mobile phone call made by Martin Cooper of Motorola in New York City. In May 1973, we get the Sears Tower in Chicago topping out, so being completed, becoming then the world's tallest building at 1,451 feet. In August of 1973, South Korean politician Kim Dae-jung is kidnapped in Tokyo by the KCIA, so civil strife continues around the world. The US bombing of Cambodia ends, officially halting 12 years of combat activity in Southeast Asia. We also get the Normalstog robbery, famous for the origin of the term Stockholm Syndrome. And we get the disappearance of Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirsty Gordon, two Australian girls who went missing whilst attending an Aussie rules football match at the Adelaide Oval, never to be seen again. In September 1973, Scottish racing driver Jackie Stewart wins the World Drivers' Championship. Good one there for all you Formula One fans. And in September the 11th, Chile's democratically elected government is overthrown in a violent military coup. President Salvador Allende allegedly commits suicide during the coup in the presidential palace, and General Augusto Pinochet heads a US-backed military junta that governs Chile for the next 17 years. And if you want to know more about that, there is a fantastic film by Pablo Larraín called El Conde, which is on Netflix, which imagines Pinochet as a vampire and is just a brilliant, wonderful, imaginative, beautifully shot black and white film. So if you want to get into that topic, I highly recommend it. September 18th, the two German republics, West and East, are admitted to the United Nations. Gosh, that took a long time, right? We're in 73. World War II ended in 45. So goodness. And we also have that famous Battle of the Sexes tennis match where Billie Jean King beats Bobby Riggs in a singles tennis match. There's also a very well-cast movie about this starring Emma Stone, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Bit of a disappointment. October 73, the Yom Kippur War begins, the fourth and largest Arab-Israeli conflict to date at that point. Egyptian and Syrian forces attacked Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights on Yom Kippur. October 17th, an OPEC oil embargo against several countries supporting Israel triggers the 1973 energy crisis, the rocketing of oil prices, starting wage price inflation spirals, a very rocky economic time. We also have on October 20th the Saturday Night Massacre. US President Richard, it's not a real massacre by the way, US President Richard Nixon orders Attorney General Elliot Richardson to dismiss Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. Richardson refuses and resigns, along with Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus. Solicitor General Robert Bork, third in line at the Department of Justice, then fires Cox. The event prompts calls for Nixon's impeachment, so the Watergate scandal really gaining pace at this point. We also have the Sydney Opera House in Australia, opened by Queen Elizabeth II after 14 years of construction work. Also in this month, the Yom Kippur War ends. We also have the completion and opening of the Bosphorus Bridge in Istanbul, connecting the continents of Europe and Asia for the first time in history. And finally, in November 73, Gerald Ford becomes Vice President of the United States because the prior Vice President had resigned due to scandal, and of course, Nixon's going to shortly follow. If you want to know about that scandal, which has been rather overshadowed in history, Rachel Maddow did a really wonderful podcast series on it called The Bagman, which I would highly recommend. Okay, so those are the events of the time, lots of political upheaval and civil strife, but the events of this novel are really going to reach back not just to World War II, but to World War I, to espionage and naval spying, and the early sort of proto-Hitler rise of fascism. So it's very much a throwback novel, and like all Tommy and Tuppence novels, it really is something that's not really a puzzle mystery, more of a thriller, but because this is very late stage or final stage Agatha Christie and she's not in control of it, it's really hard to pin down the plotting and the clues and to sort of dissect it. But anyway, we'll give it a go. So the characters, we now have Tommy and Tuppence, aged in their 70s, living in a thinly veiled version of Torquay called Hollocky, so a seaside town, and they're in a country house that's very much modelled on Agatha Christie's beloved childhood home. Tuppence is much older, she walks with a stoop, she's arthritic, but she's still mucking about. She's still that wonderful Tuppence that we know and love, particularly on True Love, a little wheeled children's toy that you can push down hills. It's kind of weird because when you read about Tuppence and sort of her monologue, you sort of imagine her much younger. And then when you see her physical constraints, it's a bit of a shock. They still have their loyal manservant Albert, who's a bit of a man of all trades, including a little bit of spying, we'll discover. And we have Hannibal the dog, which is based on Agatha Christie's own beloved Manchester Terrier. And as in her novel Dumb Witness, we will get some doggy thoughts. And it's quite lovely that for a woman who absolutely adored her household pets and her dogs, the final lines she ever wrote were how proud Hannibal should be of the role he's played in this solving this mystery. So it ends on a very wonderful and cute note. I suppose we should then mention Mary Jordan, who is in the setup of this novel. Mary Jordan is innocent. Here's a quotation. "It was someone called Mary Jordan I was asking about," said Tuppence. "Beatrice said you knew about her." "Not really, I just heard her name mentioned once or twice. But it was ages ago. Lovely golden hair she had, my grandmother said. German she was, one of those Frauleins as they were called. Looked after the children, a kind of nurse. Had been with the naval family somewhere." End quote. So she's kind of vaguely foreign, looks Nordic, maybe Germanic. And it turns out that she has died of eating foxglove leaves by mistake. So digitalis poisoning, which apparently is easy to do. They can be mixed up with sorrel and spinach. And that's meant to be the apparent cause of death. But one of the kids who she was looking after, Master Alexander Parkinson, he was suspicious, and he's the one who's underlined the words in the novel. And then it turns out that he also died young, maybe suspiciously young, at the age of 14. Now, there are other characters in the book, but I'm not sure it's really worth going into them. We have a gardener who has a long memory, and lots of people in the village who have long memories of things that happened in World War One and Two, so who know the rumours about Mary Jordan and can hint at what might have happened. They're not particularly well delineated. We also have some spy masters who come back from prior novels. So you have Mr. Robinson, who featured heavily in Passenger to Frankfurt. He's always referred to by the colour of his skin being yellowish, the yellow whale, and that he knows lots about international finances. His ethnicity is never specified. People don't know. Is he English? Is he European? Is he Japanese maybe? I think it is weirdly progress for Agatha Christie that she doesn't associate money and finance with him being Jewish. So that's good, but it is a weird kind of characterization. We also get Colonel Atkinson, one of Tommy's old spy masters. So, yeah. Oh, and Colonel Pikeaway. Colonel Pikeaway makes a reappearance too. So, where Tuppence's role as ever is to sort of poke around in the village and talk to old ladies and old dears and find out what happened. Tommy's role is often to just go to London and hang out in clubs and have chats with old spy masters and find out information that way. He also has a woman who's a researcher, so maybe a bit in that role of Mr. Goby that Poirot has. Now that they're older, they have young researchers who can go off and ferret in the official records. And in this case, it's not marriage certificates or birth certificates, but it's a census. So a census was taken the every 10 years that we have in the UK. And on a census day, on the census form, you have to fill in everyone that was in your house. And the house in question, this country house, was hosting a house party. So that's very useful because you can see exactly who was in the house on the day that Mary Jordan was accidentally poisoned, or was she murdered. So that's a big clue. Okay, so like I said, there's not much more to say about characters, unfortunately, in this novel. It's not that well filled, although Tommy and Tuppence, as ever, I absolutely adore them. I mean, they adore each other. They're so fond of each other. They've aged kind of not really. I mean, Tuppence is still the same, pootling around. There's just pages and pages of dialogue on this book. It's almost all dialogue because Agatha's writing on her dictaphone. And Tommy and Tuppence just bantering back and forth as they dissect the belly of this old rocking horse, Mathilde. It's pointless and aimless. And I guess to some readers it might feel frustrating, but I just delighted in all of that. Here are some reviews at the time. Maurice Richardson in The Observer said, now in their 70s, the Beresfords, that amateur detective couple of hers, whom some of us found too sprightly for comfort, have acquired a Proustian complexity. A code message in an Edwardian children's book puts him onto the murder of a governess involved in a pre-1914 German spy case. Past and present go on interlocking impressively. Despite political naivety, this is a genuine tour de force with a star part for Hannibal, the Manchester Terrier. So quite a lovely review there. But let's contrast with Robert Barnard. Quote, the last book Christie wrote, best and easily forgotten, end quote. Oh, so damning. Progressive or regressive? How does this novel hold up to modern ears? Like I said, it's a case of happy adoption, so that's good. And I spoke about the yellow whale of Mr. Robinson not being a Jew, so I suppose that's progress. And as for adaptations, there are none. No one's had the ability to tackle this and to trim it down and shake out a good story from it. So there's only 4 of her novels that don't have adaptations, and this is one of them. I'm going to leave it there and come back to you after the end credits music for some of the clues and the solution to this novel. This is a short episode. Is it a book worth reading? If you love Tommy and Tuppence, yes. If not, then sadly, no. But how sad it is to leave Agatha in this state, and how wonderful to be able to come back with a 1940s novel, Curtain, published in 1975, in the next episode. So thank you for listening. Okay, folks, we're back. Here are some of the clues to this novel, insofar as there are clues. Mary Jordan, we're told, comes from Strasbourg. So from that, we should infer that her allegiance could either be to the Allies or the Axis, because it's a town that's really on that French-German border that's been disputed and handed back and forth. So just because she speaks German and looks Germanic doesn't mean necessarily that she was spying for the Germans, and as will later be revealed, she was actually spying for us. Another clue or significant item and object will be a couple of S-shaped porcelain stools, the sort of things you could put things into, Tuppence says, called Oxford and Cambridge. And even from the first, as soon as Tuppence starts digging and ferreting about, things start to go wrong. There's a pane of glass that comes down on Tuppence in the glass house. The wheels have been tampered with on True Love, according to Isaac the gardener. Isaac the gardener also reveals that a young man used to leave letters in Matilda the rocking horse. And then we also get this cute clue where there are 3 sort of short words, but if you rearrange them, they spell out Lohengrin, the Wagnerian opera. So what happens? The mysterious spy master, Mr. Robinson, reveals that Mary was working for Britain in the war. And Colonel Atkinson reveals that Hollocky was infiltrated during the war by a sort of proto-fascist gang that was working with Germany. And actually, we then find out that Mary was sent to Hollocky undercover as a governess to try and work out what was going on. We learn that there was a proto-fascist leader called Christopher Kane, I believe, who was somehow, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the political naivete that Maurice Richardson was referring to. It's vaguely big four-ish, bad, evil people want to do bad, evil things. Lohengrin, I guess, is the password to all of that. We discover that poor child who'd stumbled on this knowledge and written in the book was killed. Obviously, the gardener is also killed because he's also helping Tuppence. He's coshed over the head and left for dead. He's the victim, I guess, in the contemporary murder mystery. And the person who actually did it is one of the ladies who's living in the village. And it turns out that she would have been someone who was originally, back in the day, her relatives would have been in with this proto-fascist guy. I mean, fine. Who cares? It just doesn't really make any sense. But from my perspective, yes, it's a rambling, frustrating read, but I did enjoy spending some time with Tommy and Tuppence, and I'm glad this is Agatha Christie's last book. She's so evidently struggling in this, and in Elephants Can Remember. I don't think she should have been allowed to publish them, to be honest, and it kind of makes me sad as well as joyful reading them. Anyway, we will return next time for Curtain, which is an infinitely better book. It's back to one of her peak writing periods in the 30s and 40s, and we will hopefully enjoy that a great deal more than this. But it makes me sad. It just makes me sad that this is how we're leaving Agatha in the present day. Anyway, if you'd like to join the discussion, please leave a comment on the YouTube channel. And also remember, you can join us on our Discord server if you go to vokpodcast.com, or if you go to our YouTube channel, Vassals of Kingsgrave, you'll find a link to that Discord server and join the discussion. Thank you for listening. Thank you.